Just to begin, thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Dawson, and I'm here with Nuclear New York, also New York Energy and Climate Advocates, and other organizations and individuals from across the state. We are a coalition from all walks of life from both sides of the aisle. But most of all, we're New Yorkers. New Yorkers who understand the reality of how electricity is generated and how decarbonizing our grid can actually succeed. And we're New Yorkers who are deeply concerned that our state is embarking upon an energy strategy that will not achieve its noble goal of a zero-emission grid, and also worried that these efforts could hurt the economy and the communities of our great state. We're also very grateful to be joined here by many friends, including internationally recognized climate scientist Dr. James Hansen. As you know, Dr. Hansen sounded the alarm on global warming in his famous testimony before Congress in 1988, and he has communicated ever since, both from a moral and a technical standpoint, on the need for effective energy policy to protect the planet and future generations. Given the complexity of energy systems, we should not discriminate against any individual technology. We must bring the full set of resources to the table that are necessary to solve the problem. Yes, we need renewables, but we also need nuclear power. A lot of nuclear power, a lot more than we have today, because New York needs the reliable zero-emission electricity and the reliable jobs that nuclear brings. This afternoon, New York's Climate Action Council will be accepting public comments on its draft scoping plan for implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, otherwise known as the CLCPA. We want the CLCPA to succeed, but we're concerned that this will not happen unless a course correction is made. So with that being said, we have a panel of three main speakers and a few others. So first up, we have Dr. James Hansen. Dr. James Hansen, former director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, is an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Earth Institute, where he directs a program in climate science, awareness, and solutions. He is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and has received numerous awards, including the Sophie and Blue Planet Prizes. Dr. Hansen?
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to review this New York plan. And frankly, I am shocked by this document. I mean, really shocked. It looks to me like it's a prescription for making New York State the Germany of the United States. It's almost a carbon copy of the disastrous German energy plan. You may have heard in the last couple of days there were 5 European leaders who were planning to go to Ukraine and meet with President Zelensky. And he said 4 of them were welcome. The 5th one could stay home. That was the leader of Germany. Right. Zelensky is a very blunt, honest person who understands the reason that Europe is in such a fix where they're so dependent on gas and oil from Russia. So, and my colleague, Pushkar Karicha, and I have published several papers over the last decade or so in which we look at the overall energy situation and conclude that renewables are crucial or important for the future. But as we develop them and increase their contribution, we should first close coal plants. And if we get those closed, then we can close the gas plants. But Germany did it upside down. They closed the nuclear plants first, and their emissions actually go up. And they're now stuck. And you're not talking about just 10 years. You're talking 25 years and longer. They know very well that they're going to keep being reliant on fossil fuels. It just makes no sense at all. But that's what they're doing. And it looks like that's what this New York plan is mimicking. New York State has the potential to be a technology leader. And to help the United States move in a direction of 100% carbon-free electricity, and which is necessary if we're going to stabilize climate. Or New York could lead us down the German path. And if we do that in the near future, I can promise you that we're going to come to a point where we say, oh, we have locked in the future loss of the West Antarctic ice sheet, with the consequence of a sea level rise of 5 to 6 meters, 20 feet, and the loss of coastal cities. Miami, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, all large parts of those cities would be underwater. We can't let that happen. But if we don't get onto a path of carbon-free energy, we are going to lock that in. And what it means is that we will have lock-in fracking. We'll lock in the pipelines that go with that. We will lock in the methane emissions, the air pollution. That's what is part of this plan. So we really have to look at that plan. So let me end with a few sentences that my oldest grandson wrote when he was 10 years old. He said, if we keep doing what we're doing now, then the environment will be ruined when the people who are kids now are grown-ups. And unless we can figure out how to make a time machine that actually works, there will be no way to go back in time to fix it. It's not fair that the grown-ups now are ruining the atmosphere for the grown-up in the future. Grown-ups now are scared of nuclear power, but they should be scared of what will happen if they keep doing what they're doing. Because we know the ways to make nuclear power safe, and we know that using fossil fuels is not safe. It is very dangerous. So I thought he got a good summary of the situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hansen. We'll keep this going. Next up, we have Keith Schue. Keith has a master's degree in engineering and worked in the private sector for 14 years. Before moving to New York, he was employed with the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy on issues relating to the impacts of human development and infrastructure on ecosystems. He has been engaged in New York's energy policy since 2010 and currently volunteers as a technical advisor to Nuclear New York and New York Energy and Climate Advocates. He has provided technical input on the Federal Clean Power Plan and New York State Clean Energy Standard. Keith?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I actually have some slides, and I'll try to move quickly through this. So just to start with, I want to make it perfectly clear that we are not against renewables. We realize we need renewables. We need more renewables. But as we're going to talk today, we need nuclear power as well. We need more nuclear power as well. So 2019, that's when the CLCPA was first passed. What was our energy picture at that time? Here it was. Most of it actually wasn't fossil fuels. Most of it was clean, carbon-free energy. But look who the workhorses were. It was large-scale hydropower, and it was nuclear. Okay, this picture actually is has gotten worse, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want you to see where we are starting out with. Now let's look at what the plan that NYSERDA has for us. This is looking at the capacity, basically a measure of all the stuff that you have to have, all the stuff you have to build to create the energy that you need, regardless of how often the different pieces of equipment are operating. This is how much of it that you need. And look at the massive increase. Why the massive increase? Well, we know we need more electricity, okay, with electrification of heating systems and vehicles and so forth. But most of this, what you're seeing, is a massive increase due to the underperformance of the resources that are being chosen here. Solar has a capacity factor of like 14%. So a lot of times it's sitting there doing nothing. And so you have resources that are underperforming. You need to have more of them. And because of the intermittency, because you don't have the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, you don't have electricity when you need it. So you need battery storage. And because batteries aren't enough, you also have to have backup generation from something else, FERB, carbon-free generation. Well, how much of that do you need? Well, you need almost as much as the fossil fuels you had to start with in terms of capacity. So what does that mean on the ground? It means that we're going to need to have twice as much offshore wind as what the CLCPA called for initially. It means we're going to have to build onshore wind turbines, a turbine somewhere upstate, every 3 or 4 days. And by the way, when was the last time we built a wind turbine in New York? It was like 4 years ago. But anyway, this is what would have to happen. How about solar? 50,000 megawatts. And even if you take out the behind the meter, the rooftop solar and so forth, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of land. When you do the math, it ends up being an area bigger than the whole city limits of Binghamton. Has to be converted from whatever it was, farms, forests, has to be converted to glass, copper, and steel every single year. This is how much for the next 30 years. And that's using NYSERDA's numbers. I'll talk about that in a second. We need lots more transmission to make the plan that NYSERDA has put forward work. And we need a lot more storage. This is the biggest battery plant in the whole world. It's Moss Landing, California. We would need about 100 of these things built all over the place. And as I mentioned, backup generation. Well, NYSERDA's plan for this is to essentially go with hydrogen, and we're not against hydrogen. I think there's a role for hydrogen in this equation. But the question becomes, how much of it do you need? If you're going with a predominantly wind and solar approach, lots of intermittent sources, then you're talking about more wind and solar to create the electricity, to run the electrolyzers, to create the hydrogen, to store that hydrogen in salt caverns, and then to run it through fuel cells later on to produce electricity again, which, by the way, has like a 50% round-trip loss, and about 400 miles of additional hydrogen-grade pipeline. All this for backup capacity that you would need just a few days in a year. It starts to not really make much sense. In fact, you need as much capacity, as I said, as all your existing gas plants that we have today in the state. Anyway, if it's starting to kind of sound like a Rube Goldberg picture, like the mousetrap game, you take a relatively straightforward problem and make it as complicated as you possibly can. That's what's happening here. That's what we see as happening here. And I want to point out that these are kind of with the rose-colored glasses that NYSERDA has in looking at this. There's another entity called the New York System Operator. They're the ones whose job it is to keep the lights on. When they do the math, their phase 2 analysis says you'd even have to have more of this stuff in 2040 than NYSERDA says you need in 2050. So there's a reality problem I think we're seeing here. And I'm not going to go through all the difficulties with the plan and all the problems that we found in it, but I will talk about one as an example: overestimated capacity factor. Like I said, it's 14% solar in New York. Well, they assumed it's 22%. If you correct that one mistake, you find that you need this much more solar to make it actually work. So, and what would that mean? Instead of an area the size of Binghamton converted to glass, copper, and steel every year, we're talking an area the size of this city, Albany, every single year. I think we can see this is not going to happen. and the reality issues with this. And what happens if you have a Pollyannish approach to energy? Well, you fail. And there are some pretty stark examples out there of what failure looks like. California, here we come, I guess, because you can see what's happened over the last 20 years. Sure, they have expanded renewables, and that's good, but they've dropped their nuclear. They're shutting down nuclear. And if you look at where their fossil fuels were 20 years ago and where it is now, it's gone up and down, but it hasn't changed much. This is the result of bad policy, and they don't have an efficient grid anymore. They don't have a reliable grid anymore. They have blackouts. They actually had to fire up some gas plants, some new gas plants, just to get a reliable system back recently. And their prices for electricity are going through the roof. How about Germany? Germany has been very proud of the program called Energiewende. Energiewende is basically energy transformation. They want to go with renewables, wind and solar. They want to get rid of, they basically said that nuclear power is verboten. And this is the situation. Electricitymapper.org, go to that anytime and you can see what the carbon footprint of the energy systems, of the electricity systems in these countries are. Brown means it's more dirty, has a more higher carbon content. Green means it's a lower carbon content. That's Germany right there. It's brown. After all this tremendous effort with renewables, it's brown. And why is that? Well, yeah, they built a lot of wind and solar. You can see it right here. That's the capacity they've added. Too bad it's not running most of the time. Where are they actually getting their energy from? Well, it's coal. It's from gas. Let's look at the neighbor across the way, France. Well, they decarbonized. How did they do it? They did it with nuclear power. And they did it decades ago. So you don't have to go too far to see what failure looks like. How about here in New York State? I don't want to dwell on this, but the facts are that we lost nuclear capacity in this state recently, and fossil fuel use went up. Don't let anybody tell you this didn't happen. There's some folks who say, oh no, it got replaced with renewables and efficiency. No, this is NICE's numbers. Their numbers don't lie. This is what actually happened. So what's the answer? Well, are we saying let's just do all nuclear? No, we're not saying that. We're saying we need nuclear and renewables. We need a credible climate plan that does not discriminate against viable carbon-free sources. So how might you do that? Well, if you have a source of energy that has 95% capacity factor that can run all the time, the best thing you can do is actually use that and use that capacity to meet that baseload demand that we've got there. That's what we call system level efficiency, the optimal use of generation capacity. And what can do that? Well, it's our fine upstate nuclear plants. Fitzpatrick, 9 Mile Point, and Gunay, they've been doing it for decades. And we know they can continue to do it for decades more. But, okay, the reality is, they have licenses that have to be renewed, and some of them are up pretty soon. So if we're smart, we'll renew these licenses. If we're dumb, we won't. But we feel this needs to happen. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the scoping plan, the scoping plan basically acknowledges that we need these plants for those other numbers in their document to work out, for the benefit cost analysis to work out. You see that in the appendix. You don't see the nice things said about nuclear in the other parts of the document, but you do see it in the appendix. And the interesting thing is, even with the assumption of keeping these plants, you don't really have a realistic plan. It's the things I was pointing to a moment ago. So what do we need? We need to keep our existing nuclear, but we also need new nuclear if we're actually to solve this problem. And that's where some good news is on the horizon and happening right now. There's some great designs, some great concepts that are out there, small modular reactors. These are things that can be built in factories and brought to the site. Bill Gates is working on a project, a natrium reactor, TerraPower with GE Hitachi. This has thermal storage associated with it. So even the IPCC recognizes that nuclear needs to be part of the picture if we're going to have a credible chance of achieving our climate goals. In all 4 illustrative pathways from the IPCC, they show nuclear expanding. But New York's going the other direction. So we see a problem with that. So just as a thought experiment, what if we did insert new nuclear into the picture? What if, say, in the year 2035, when the SMRs and other things become more accessible, what if we started building new nuclear in the year 2035 instead of additional solar? Then you actually start to see a concept here that's much more realistically achievable. And you don't need as much backup generation either because you already have reliable energy with nuclear. So what happens when you get nuclear? Well, you get to give the next generation a planet. That's pretty important. As you all know, nuclear power has the lowest life cycle emissions of any carbon-free energy source. It uses very little land. It has the least physical land footprint of any energy source. This is lithium mining, but we don't have to talk about that. You understand the implications of batteries associated with that. But just let's look at the nuts and bolts of what goes into building a power plant. Steel, copper, aluminum, concrete. On all these accounts, nuclear uses a very small amount of material compared to other forms of generation. So if you are saving on material, if you're saving on land, what do you get? You get this. You get to save farmland, and you get to save nature. We think this is pretty important. You also get reliability. I don't want to see the lights go out on Broadway. I don't want to see the New York Stock Exchange not have electricity. I'd like to see manufacturing. I'd like to see more manufacturing in the state of New York. But you're going to have reliable, abundant electricity to do that. And of course, as you're going to hear from some other folks in a moment, high-wage union jobs come with nuclear. And just to close this out, other countries are getting on board. France has recently announced that they are going to be building the next generation of nuclear power plants. So has the United Kingdom. So has Netherlands. Canada is making progress too with work on small modular reactors. And here in the United States, that plant I told you about with Bill Gates, well, that's replacing a coal plant in Wyoming. So we're replacing dirty energy with clean energy, and we're keeping jobs. So what's not to like about that? And in Congress, on both sides of the aisle, you're seeing members of Congress recognizing that if we're going to solve this problem, then nuclear needs to be part of the solution. This is what U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm said. We're very bullish on advanced nuclear reactors. Nuclear is dispatchable, clean baseload power, so we want to bring more on. So we're with her. We're hoping that Governor Hochul is with her. We know the fine people who work at the upstate plants here in New York are with her on this too. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Now we have a couple speakers from the labor side of nuclear. First, we have Mike Bradshaw. Mike is the business representative of the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers Local 97. A lifelong resident of Oswego, New York, Mike attended Oswego State University and started working at 9 Mile Point Nuclear Power Plant in 1985, where he worked in operations and instrument and controls maintenance. He served as the site union safety advocate from 2011 to 2018. And he started as a union steward in 1996 in operations, then became site chief steward in 2010, and became NMP business rep in 2019. Mike?
So you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. I'm don't normally do speaking like this, but I got some notes here, and I just want to let you know how important these jobs are to our local economy. I've lived in that area, as we said, my whole life, and they're really the backbone of our economy and the best paying jobs that are in the area. So as I said, I'm Mike Bradshaw. I've been a resident for my whole life. We represent the IBW, about 875 members that work at the two facilities. Our members receive extensive initial training and continued training and are highly skilled in their fields. Being that we're an inside union, so it's not just electricians we have. Okay, we have security officers, we have carpenters, we have mechanics, electricians, operators, Local 97 employees, all those in an inside union. Okay, we also, during outage times, which we will have between the three plants, we have at least one outage every year, and every other year we have two outages. So we'll employ, normally for each outage, we'll bring in about 800 to 1,000 union contract personnel. That would be the trades unions, boilermakers, iron workers, carpenters, insulators, pipe fitters, millwrights. I'll probably miss somebody, and they're going to yell at me about it, but those are good, high-paying union jobs for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks during the refuel outage. Not if the plant shuts down, but during refuel outages, we bring all those trades in. So those full-time positions that we have that are available, like I said, they're the best in the area. And I can tell you that generations of families, just from me being out there as long as I have been, have been led very prosperous lives in our area from those positions. You know, their family, you know, maybe I was an operator. I sent my daughters to school for engineering, all right, because I saw that, you know, it's really a good field, and you get a good education there, and you can learn a lot in nuclear. The trouble with nuclear is it's kind of shielded from people. People don't really know what goes on at the plant. You know, they think, oh, that, like, we have the cooling tower. They think that plume of steam that's coming out of that is like fallout or something, you know, and until you educate them. So I just think that we really need to have that as part of our carbon-free ideas here. And of course, economically, these plants, you know, as far as you know, they pay millions of dollars in our areas for you know, local taxes, state taxes, school taxes, you know, which allows us to really have great schools up there, great communities. So it's just really, we really need those plants up there. And like we showed 2029, our licenses are up at Gannett. Now I don't represent Gannett, but their license will be up, and 9 Mile 1. There is plans to relicense. I mean, Constellation Energy, who owns the plants, was Exelon. They split generation and utility. Utility still Exelon. We became Constellation. But they reinvest in those plants to harden those units because they intend to run those plants for a very long time. So that's a good thing. And you know, we also need to know that, you know, these plants run 24/7, 365 days a year. You know, we talk about base load. Those plants are what's base load in the grid. I mean, our units produce 2750 megawatts of clean energy. And if you add Gannett with it, I think you're around 3,300 megawatts. And at Unit 2, there was a plan before they had another unit staked out there to they were going to plan on building, and Fukushima kind of put a stop to that. But there was a plan to build another one. So we have area to build another reactor. We don't, like was said, we don't really need any more area. We have area there, and we have dry cask storage for our spent fuel, so that stays right there on that site too. So you're not looking to find something to do with windmill blades or solar panels, burying stuff in the ground, or, you know, everything stays right there on that site. So that's about all I really have. You know, I guess in closing, I'd like to say that I think that if we're looking to be successful with the aggressive carbon-free goals that New York State has put forward, I think we need to look at the jobs end of it also. I mean, those are the best jobs up there, highly skilled jobs, best jobs up there, I say, that in our area. You have to have a balance between that, I think, and you know, the carbon carbon free. You know what I mean? I mean, I think that nuclear power has to be a part of New York State's energy plan, and in order for us to meet these goals, and in order for us to keep our economy and keep our people working in our area. That's all I got.
Thanks, Mike. We now have a few words from another voice from the labor side of nuclear, John J. Murphy. John is the international representative of the United Association of Plumbers, Pipefitters, and Sprinkler Fitters, representing more than 24,000 members in the state of New York, while also serving as the vice president of the New York State AFL-CIO, the New York City Central Labor Council, and the New York State Building and Construction Trades Council. John serves on the boards of New York State Helmets to Hard Hats program, Climate Jobs New York, Clean Energy Jobs Coalition New York, and the Workers Institute Advisory Council at Cornell. John?
Thank you. If there's any other non-paying titles, I'm your guy. Good afternoon. My name is John J. Murphy, and I'm an international representative for the United Association of Plumbers, Pipefitters, and Sprinkler Fitters, and a lifelong New Yorker. It took over 100 years to build our current energy infrastructure. The CLCPA mandates its complete transformation in the next 18 years. It's critical to develop realistic transition strategy to meet New York's climate challenges, a strategy that is not driven by radical hysteria and emotion, but a realistic plan to meet our state's rapidly growing power needs. New York can meet that challenge by using an all-of-the-above approach to clean energy sources that are affordable and reliable, including clean energy sources like zero-carbon nuclear energy that will not only preserve, but create tens of thousands of high-paying union jobs. We do not have sufficient green energy available today to replace fossil fuels. We will, but not today. One example, as Doctor had so aptly brought the example about, was Germany, who over the last decade built an enormous supply of renewables, but because of the failure to meet the growing energy demand, has had to rely on oil, coal, and natural gas. In the first half of 2021, coal-fired generation rose from 21% to 27%. Irrational closures have proven to make matters worse. We've seen it with Indian Point. Those were 1,000 full-time jobs that were lost and more than $30 million in revenue to the community. Yet among the loudest voices in the environmental community refuse to accept the notion that we don't have to displace middle-class union jobs to achieve our climate goals. We should build out all clean energy sources available, including renewables. But instead of driving massive subsidies to mostly renewable sources, New York State should favor those clean energy facilities that create and maintain the highest number of high-skilled, high-paid jobs. The New York Times recently reported that solar installers made an average of 50% less than a building trades union member with little to no maintenance crew on the solar facility. In contrast to a 100-megawatt solar farm, a similar size small modular reactor creates 400% more high-paid construction jobs and more than 400 operation and maintenance jobs. If we don't change course, we're on a path to job displacement, not job creation, and the answer lies in plain sight. Our members are extremely proud of the important work that we do to bring clean energy to our communities. However, well-intentioned environmental groups continue to flood social media with the misconception that big oil and gas are fighting the clean air movement. The reality is that tens of thousands of union plumbers, pipefitters, millwrights, teamsters, insulators, so many more are not big oil and gas. They're the middle-class New Yorkers that build and maintain the facilities that keep the lights on and keep our homes warm. They've earned the right to maintain that middle-class existence and lead the state towards a cleaner future. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to some questions. We have a panel, which I'll introduce. We have a pretty small room, so I won't make everybody come up here, but if anybody wants to ask a question, you can address someone directly or the group, and people can jump in. So just real quick, we have Dr. James Hansen, Keith Schue, Mike Bradshaw, John J. Murphy. We are also delighted to have Herschel Spector, a retired engineer, formerly with the Atomic Energy Commission, as well as the AEC licensing manager for Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. And we have Isru Seneviratne and Dietmar Dietrich and myself, Eric Dawson. We're with Nuclear New York, and we are pro-nuclear advocates. So if we have any questions, happy to start us off if we don't right away, if people are feeling shy. Maybe I'll ask our first question, if you're comfortable coming up, Herschel, about waste. Maybe you could say a few words. People are worried about nuclear waste. You want to come up to the podium just so we can hear you?
I haven't tracked down the whole story of nuclear waste because it seemed, frankly, absurd to begin with. We've had nuclear waste basically sitting around in pools for over 50 years, like at Indian Point and across the country. I've yet to find anybody in the public who was ever harmed by any of these existing nuclear waste facilities. So now we want to take the nuclear waste and bury it in deep geological repositories. I challenge anybody to tell me what is the scenario where somebody gets at harm. Are they going to crawl 700 or 1,000 feet underground and get exposed to radiation? I rather doubt it. The actual things about nuclear waste there are some unique characteristics. Let me tell you about one unique characteristic about nuclear waste. They're paid for. You and I paid for them when we purchased electricity. The government has failed to follow through, but to my knowledge, there is no other energy source that is paid for. Furthermore, the volume of the waste, how much we have it, is relatively tiny. Nothing like the huge mountains of coal ash that you see around the coal power plants, and we know where all of it is. What has happened is the anti-nuclear movement has turned a political problem, everybody's afraid of radiation, into calling it a technical problem. Oh, the wastes are going to last millions of years, and humans have never built anything that lasts so long. Well, it doesn't mean if something lasts millions of years that it is a danger for millions of years. In fact, the danger, if you even went into one of these waste repositories and sat there, probably in a couple hundred years, well within human experience, is essentially down to close to background radiation. So where's the danger? The danger is that people have misrepresented, very seriously misrepresented, and ladled this thing with fear that is something you and I are supposed to be afraid of. Well, that is beginning to fall apart. There are countries like Finland, which now has a nuclear waste repository, and Sweden is close behind. We are very used to digging deep into the earth. It's not anything new. So what's the problem? Is it technical or is it political? My bet, it's totally political. Thank you.
Well said.
Can I add one thing to
Yeah.
that? Because that was, you know, nuclear waste is probably the best kind of waste to have because it's compact and it's contained. The fossil fuel industry puts its waste into the atmosphere, and that kills people. The nuclear industry, it's compact, it's contained, and it's recyclable. It can be turned into fuel France has been doing this for years with reprocessing. And I think some of the newer nuclear technologies will actually be able to use spent nuclear fuel from existing plants in the newer plants.
Just a point, Kate. Harvard recently provided research that about 8 million people die annually globally from fossil fuel combustion emissions.
Yes.
And so far, 0 people have died annually ever from nuclear waste emissions, plus those emissions from fossil fuels are cooking the planet. You have a double whammy.
Dr. Hansen and his colleagues did a study. 1.8 million people lives have been saved with nuclear power.
That
right?
was about 10 or 12 years ago. The number now is much larger.
Yeah, and get larger yet.
And in fact, the number, we made the most conservative assumption so that nobody could challenge it. The total number of lives saved by displacing fossil fuels, replacing them with nuclear, is really very large. You know, the total number of people dying from pollution per year is the 3.5 million from outdoor air pollution. Then there's the indoor air pollution, and much of that is from energy sources, burning wood or burning other things. Yeah. So nuclear saves enormous number of lives.
Yeah, really the worst kind of pollution is air pollution. And in some ways, one of the deadliest problems globally is a lack of electricity on a grid. So nuclear solves both of these problems. Any questions?
I'd like to make a further statement, if you wouldn't mind, just as a follow-up to what Keith said about the technologies. I heard something, even though I've been a nuclear engineer for many years, I'm still learning. One thing I learned recently is how long this country might be able to fulfill all of its electricity needs if it used the nuclear waste in a very smart way. And we have two kinds of nuclear waste. We have the nuclear waste in the spent fuel. You know, lots of countries have figured out how to take that back because we only burn up a very small percentage of the uranium. So all of that uranium has already been mined. So we'll take that piece. And then we have something called depleted uranium. This is when you pull uranium out of the earth, it's only 7 parts per 1,000. That is the type we burn in our Indian Point style reactors. People know with a different type of reactor how to use the other 993 parts per 1,000. So I have two waste streams. And the number I heard is if people built the reactors that can use these two so-called wastes, it'll be enough electricity in the United States already mined to run this country for about 250 years.
Very good.
That's a lot. That's a lot of juice.
Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the question, the ICP report actually mentioned that one of the drawbacks of nuclear power is actually the public, the fear of the public. And the question is now, how would you, since apparently the fossil industry and the big green industry are kind of in a kind of what you call it, in a partnership, because Shell is building the offshore windmills in Massachusetts, and BP is building the offshore windmills in New York. What needs to be done to change the public opinion? What kind of campaign needs to be started?
For those who didn't hear the question, it was about the kind of strange bedfellows relationship between low capacity factor renewables like solar and wind and the natural gas industry. And often we find that, they'll say solar and wind will make up this percentage, and then the rest will be another dispatchable form. They never actually say what it is. Natural gas, it's another fossil fuel. It's contributing to carbon emissions. Keith, do you want to maybe comment on that?
I think you said that very well.
Oh, okay.
Let me correct something. BP and Equinor, which are two huge oil companies, are not building a wind turbine off of Long Island, as they said they would. They just applied to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for a 1.5-year delay for some kind of administrative problems. The truth is that in order to put in the offshore wind turbines, and they're talking about a monster that goes up 600 or 700 feet in the air, you need to have a special ship called a jack ship. These are special ships that put down long columns into the sand, and then they lift themselves up, and then they have tremendous cranes on top of this. They're out there in the water, and they can begin to lift up the wind turbines. By the way, the blades are about the length of a football field. They're not small. The hub is tremendously heavy, so you need this crane to lift it up. So you need a special ship. How many ships, jack ships, does New York State have to install the 700-foot tall wind turbines? Zero. Oh, wow. Oh. How much do they cost if you want to buy one? Oh, $500 million. Takes 3 years. There's only one being built in the United States by Dominion Electric. Most of the jack ships that there are being built in China.
Here, let's leave it
Where
there
are the
just for
jobs
now.
for the unions? You guys have to learn to talk Chinese.
Maybe we all do. Any questions in English or any other language? Open floor. Yeah, sure.
So,
And if you have a specific person you want to ask, feel free.
I believe a couple of speakers mentioned Bill Gates' project in Wyoming, I think it was.
Yes, the Natrium Project.
Sure. So what are the group's thoughts on the role of sort of state level government investment versus federal investment with potentially Build Back Better bill has been proposed versus private investment like that through nonprofits or even for-profit companies?
Any of us can take this. I mean, I would just say there's no apparent magic bullet. I think that we need all hands on deck. And energy policy is so complex, and it's influenced by the private sector in terms of investors, but also by voters in terms of voting for who gets what subsidies. So if we convince a majority of voters that nuclear is a good thing, and we convince a majority of investors, especially the newfound ESG investors, I mean, there's really nothing more ESG than nuclear, as we have discovered today, from a labor perspective, from a climate perspective, any perspective. So I think we just need to convince more people, and the cost will come down, and we'll have more nuclear plants built. Dr. Hansen?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that also. Since I worked for the government for several decades, I think to get things done efficiently and to drive the cost down, you need the private sector to be the builder. What you need to do is get the government out of the way. And we've done a very good job of building up government agencies that stand in the way. And that really needs to be fixed. It's hard to believe, but it's true that many of the appointees to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission are actually anti-nuclear. You know, when I have many environmental friends who, you know, they've been schooled in anti-nuclear beginning way back in the 1970s. I have this little movie clip of 200,000 people in New York City Park at an anti-nuclear rally, and they're swinging and swaying and singing, "Give me the warm glow of a wood fire. Take your nuclear poison away." And you know, I point out that this indoor air pollution from wood fires is killing thousands of people per day. It's just irrational. But that period ended up with this movement that turned out to be very productive, particularly to the Democratic Party. And So they appoint anti-nuclear, and it turns out to be a vote getter. So Harry Reid was very happy to have his career based on his anti-nuclear position and stopping the geologic storage of waste, which is actually economically valuable. But so the government, we don't want them building things, but you do need to have oversight, but it needs to be based on what's best for the public, and that we're beginning to move in that direction. Actually, there's actually bipartisan agreement in Congress, which is very encouraging. That I think we can turn the corner now. That's why I'm so surprised to read this document for New York State, which should be a leader. Because there is recognition in Congress now that that nuclear needs to be a part of the energy future. And anyway, my comment that we want the...
Any more questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, especially the issue if you get like even 70 or 80% renewables worldwide, there's going to be a tremendous pressure on resources. Apparently, lithium might be a big problem, and also at the moment, apparently they're cutting balsa wood in the Ecuadorian forest to cut to make blades, to make turbine blades. That is extremely corrosive for nature and in general for everything else that dominates nature. So it seems that actually renewables are more destructive to the environment than nuclear will ever be. Can that be? I mean, people are not getting the message.
Maybe I'll take that one. So I've been an investor in energy resources for about 2 decades now. And we looked very closely at lithium and other resources that go in. Yeah, I mean, everything that we use, everything that we have, the phones, everything has, if it's not grown, it's mined out of the ground. So there is a footprint to every single thing. So I think nuclear requires some mining as well as batteries and cars and everything else. So yes, we need some kind of mining, and it needs to happen somewhere. Better it happen in a place where you have the ability to have good labor standards and have good environmental standards, and it's better to use resources that use energy sources that use as little impact on our natural environment as possible. So that's kind of what brings us to the nuclear space.
With a very small amount of uranium, small amount of land, small amount of other material sources, you get a huge amount of electricity with zero emissions. That's nuclear power in a nutshell. Any other questions? We're approaching our time at 3:30. So if there are no other questions, maybe we should end here. But just to close, there's so many problems in the world, and it's hard to focus on one at a time. But if you think of the impact of inflation right now, it is driven by energy prices more than any other factor. If you look at the issue of middle-class jobs going overseas and disappearing from automation, and of course, if you look at the issue of carbon emissions, climate change, and even just air pollution, nuclear solves all of these things. So we really think that you should tell all your friends that this is the thing that they need to actually do their own research on, and really dwell on this grim reality that the population is growing and our life expectancies are growing and our electrification is growing of vehicles and heavy machinery and buildings. We need a lot of electricity, and if it's not zero emission, then it's all for naught. Even a lot of the technologies that are brought up in the report that we'll be discussing, or people will be discussing later at the meeting, in terms of carbon capture and sequestration, hydrogen fuel cells, even a lot of the cryptocurrency, everything just requires an enormous amount of electricity. So we really can't afford to give up any individual source. So with that, thank you very much for joining us.